And welcome back to Game Escape. Today I just wanted to share my E3 reactions with you guys. It has been an interesting week in the video game industry, to say the least, and it's been a historic E3 with Sony coming out and really attacking Microsoft head-on with their price point and their used game policies and online policies. And it was just so refreshing to see. Usually I don't get excited about press conferences because I think the constant barrage of these corporate yes men and talking suits coming out there and telling you what you as a consumer should be excited about is always disingenuous and artificial and oftentimes insulting to the intelligence of the American consumer. But I couldn't look past the fact that this year the E3 marked, I think, an interesting shift and a coming battle in the video game industry and how we are going to consume games moving forward. So this was, I think it's going to go down as a classic E3 and one that we'll look back on in 3 to 5 years and kind of, at least we'll recognize its importance. We'll see how the industry develops. But there's just so much to talk about, and I just felt like I had to come out and do a little video on it. So we'll start things with Microsoft. Microsoft came out, and I really thought that they had a lot of work to do to clarify some of the lingering questions and some of the unrest that was created after the May 21st reveal of the Xbox One, and they didn't really do that. I mean, their response was to show lots and lots of games, and they did that. We saw Metal Gear Solid 5, Forza Motorsports 5, Dead Rising 3, The Witcher, and Titanfall, amongst others. And I just kind of thought that it was great to see that they were extremely committed to bringing out a lot of premier software early on in the launch window, but at the same time, what they did not do was garner a lot of goodwill towards gamers with regard to their sort of draconian usage policies. I mean, we heard that the next Xbox will allow you to share gold accounts for an entire household, but the details of that were not clear, and again, they sort of offloaded the responsibility, the DRM model responsibility, to the publishers. But they really needed to, I think, reassure us that games will not be purely rentals, that there will be some long-term usability in the software that we're going to be picking up for the Xbox One, and they didn't do that. I mean, I think they ultimately misread what the community was looking for, and that was just a strong statement that, yes, they have created a system with a different software usage model, but it will not impinge upon our enjoyment of gaming. And that's not an argument that they made. And then to end on the $4.99 price point, I think was really upsetting. And I know that I certainly, at that point, my interest kind of went out the door. The inability to give a clear statement about the DRM, and then you add on the $500 price tag. After that conference, I more or less turned off to the idea. And I think the sad thing is, as the week went on, you heard people from the Xbox camp then making all of these statements. I think as yesterday, it was be Friday the 17th, I believe Major Nelson came out and said, well, you will be able to play Xbox One titles long term. But that all needed to be in the press conference, and it just continued that trend that we saw start on May 21st, where Microsoft comes out, they're a little bit ambiguous in their press conference, and then various people come and sort of make corrections 48 hours or more later. it just did not inspire confidence, and really the only game that they showed, and this is just a personal opinion, I tend to think, the shooter genre is just so extended now to the point where I really can't get excited about Battlefield 4, Call of Duty. I think Titanfall was the most interesting game that they showed. It's nice to see that there's a new IP out there and that they're going to create this sort of persistent multiplayer world, and I thought the graphics looked great. And of course, Metal Gear Solid 5. I love the series, so I'm going to be interested in playing that. Rise, Forza, Dead Rising, it just, all these games look to me like more of the same. But yeah, and then they also talked about smart glass integration and things like that. But again, I think Xbox One needs to make some modification between now and launch. I don't think they're going to do it. I think Microsoft is pretty on message and set in what they're trying to do. But in light of what happened with Sony, I think that they really need to do something, either with price or with just a kind of clear statement of the DRM, or maybe backtracking on some of their DRM positions before it hits the market. Otherwise, it is going to be a rough launch for the Xbox One. So then Sony took the stage, and this was really the bombshell press conference at E3, coming after the Microsoft announcement, and I think me and sort of a number of other hardcore gamers, I know people that I talked to, were just so down on the Xbox, and we were kind of afraid that Sony would follow suit, that Microsoft was setting an industry standard here for how software would be released and the kind of restrictions that would be on the player, and Sony totally dismantled that. First off, we actually saw the console. It looks like a rhombus, at least from the sides. Very reminiscent of, it almost looks like a thicker PS2 Slim in a way. It's not the most attractive design, but forget about that. They showed a number of games. They had this racing game, Drive Club, which looked fairly interesting. They have Shadowfall, Killzone Shadowfall. None of the games were terribly impressive. I'm not really sure. Killzone to me is just another first-person shooter. They did talk about Knack and some of the other indie titles, which again looked okay, somewhat interesting. We had the announcement of Kingdom Hearts 3 and Final Fantasy 15, which are not going to be console exclusives, but I thought it was good that they were included in the Sony press conference, again, sort of talking to the broader hardcore gaming audience rather than people who are just into shooters and sports games. We saw Elder Scrolls Online and Destiny, and I think probably Destiny looks, to me anyway, again, it's a shooter, but it looked the most visually impressive of what they had to offer. And then also with the indies, the Transistor game from the guys who did Bastion was up there. Again, nothing that I would say just sort of blew me away, something that I must have on day one, but that was all okay because of what Sony announced with regard to how software was going to be managed. No restrictions on used games. No online connectivity where you need to check in every 24 hours. You can just play single-player games offline for as much as, for as long as you want. Don't need to check in. Give games to friends. it really was refreshing to see that they did not change the usage model here. And the applause that they garnered because of this was absolutely terrific. You can tell that the hardcore audience, even the journalists there in the convention center, they were so on board with that, and this was so calculated. I mean, Sony came out with a more casual tone. They did not sound like corporate robots like the Microsoft people did, which is, I mean, I'm not saying that, these guys are just down to earth and they have my interests in mind. I mean, they are still a large multinational corporation who's trying to aggressively take back market share from the competitors. So this whole style of presentation was very calculated, and that's a good thing. But I think we need to maybe step back and say, well, okay, so they're not just nice guys for doing this. That there's a kind of business calculus behind this. But I think it was just so refreshing after having seen the Microsoft presentation. And then they end with the price point, $399. I was sold when they were just talking about, not using the same DRM policies that Microsoft was putting in place. But then to come in $100 less, I think is absolutely terrific. And of course, you don't need the PlayStation Eye camera. Everything is optional. It allows you to use the system the way you would like to use it. Personally, I don't need a camera and a microphone watching and listening to everything that I'm doing. I guess the only slight issue was that now PlayStation Plus will be mandatory for online multiplayer, which is not a terrible thing for me. At least it has been in the past. I don't like to play online, and so I would just not purchase it. But I think the industry is moving towards a merging of single-player campaign and multiplayer, and I take it that if you want to play a game like Destiny or Drive Club, where I understand that the online connectivity will be kind of central even to the single-player experience, you're going to need to cough up $50 for PlayStation Plus. I guess with all the positives that come out, I can't be too upset about that, but it is just a kind of added cost that has to be taken into consideration. They said that the cloud streaming service would be available in 2014, the Gaikai system, which it would be nice if it were there at launch, but not terrible. I think it's interesting that the cloud, which of course Microsoft is touting as games are able to offload processing tasks to the cloud, and games like Forza will be able to analyze your driving patterns and create a drivatar, and then have that drivatar play for you in the cloud. I think Sony is just, at least from the press conference and as I understand it, using their cloud system to offer not backwards compatibility, but the ability to play some classic PlayStation 2, 3 games on the PlayStation 4. So this was an absolute home run. It was so nice to see this aggressiveness of Sony coming out and trying to, they were self-aware. They understood the marketplace. They understood the backlash that players had against their competitor, and they took advantage of that. It's going to be interesting to see how long that goodwill continues on their part. In a sense, one could imagine a scenario where they have this incredible market share for the next generation, and then they sort of revert back to their somewhat their sort of unfriendly consumer policies for which they've been noted in the past. But hopefully that won't happen. I think Sony, it's incredibly exciting. I don't usually pre-order things, but I'm probably going to pre-order the PlayStation 4 And I think, as a consumer, it was nice, even if it's just a moment in time. It was really nice to see a next-gen piece of hardware come out, and the company behind it come out and recognize the desires of the hardcore marketplace and cater to them. And lastly, we have Nintendo, and I have to say, I was upset by what I saw from Nintendo. I picked up a Wii U about a week or so after launch, and I really liked the system. I liked this idea that it was almost like a DS or 3DS in your living room, and I thought that there was a lot of potential there. But there's been nothing to play, and I think some of the titles that they announced were titles that really should have been out already. I mean, I am excited about Super Mario 3D World. I love 3D Land on the 3DS, and I will definitely pick that up. It looks like a lot of fun. I'm not sure how the mechanics will translate to not actually having a three-dimensional experience like you can on the 3DS, but I will pick that up. Aside from that, though, I can't be excited. I mean, they should have had, at the very least, a Mario Kart or a Smash Brothers soon after launch. And I like Mario Kart. I'm just not... It's just Mario Kart. Yes, it'll be there. It's a very safe option. I guess they have an anti-gravity mechanic that they're going to tout in this one. But it should have been out already. And Mario Kart is not a game that is necessarily immersive and something you're going to come back to in a single-player setting. It's great with friends, it's fun online, but it's the type of game that you really should have been able to pick up at launch, I think, because the new Super Mario Brothers U was great. It was a great 2D Mario game, but I think nowadays you need something more than a 2D Mario game at launch. Then we had Super Smash Brothers. Now, I am not a Smash Brothers fan. I love fighting games, but to me, Smash Brothers was always too random, too chaotic. It's nice that they're going to have Mega Man in there, but I couldn't get too excited about that. They're having a new Donkey Kong Country game. I still have yet to play the Donkey Kong Country game on the Wii. That's on my list, so I could kind of get into that. Not interested in Pikmin, really. And the new Monolith Soft, I believe it's like a mech-style RPG that they mention, is coming. We don't know when. But I really thought, Nintendo with the Wii U, I mean, they've done such a good job with the 3DS. I thought they needed to make a statement to seem relevant. I mean, just not having a press conference and doing one of these Nintendo Direct things, yeah, it's nice that they're talking directly to the fans, but I think they really needed something to announce just to stay in the conversation here, and they really came off as an afterthought. I mean, one of the things that I was hoping that they would do is take an older IP and maybe reinvent it for the Wii U. I mean, this is just sort of nerdy, wishful thinking, but could you imagine if they announced something like an Earthbound 2, or I guess it would be like Mother 4, because of the Japanese releases? I mean, that would have gotten people, I think, so excited. Or take an older game like Ice Climbers or Balloon Fight and reinvent it for this generation. I mean, that would have, I think, gotten people excited. Or maybe just come out and say that, one of their games will be out, one of their big announcements will be out summer of 2013, because I know, I've got some time this summer, and boy, I would love to play a Wii U game, but there's just nothing out there to buy. So I'm worried about where Nintendo's going. A little bit later in the week, they came out and they said that, well, we're not really going to limit used game sales. It was kind of an afterthought, because we believe, and this was from Reggie Fils-Aimé and then also Shigeru Miyamoto, basically saying that their games are so good and have such great replay value that they're not traded in. They're traded in far less than the industry average. Miyamoto came out and said that they actually view their games as toys and objects that you want to come back to and have the same experience for years to come. And that's great, but I don't think that philosophy is enough to sustain them. I think they need to come out and aggressively push some IPs and tell the players that, you know, you are going to be able to have this experience on the Wii U that you won't have on any other console. And so far, I purchased the Wii U thinking that I just wanted to buy it because I never purchased a console right at launch, or in this case, a week after launch. So I was aware that it would be kind of slow going with software, but I thought maybe winter 2013 would get something, and maybe spring 2013 would get something else. But I actually feel pretty jilted. Other than that, the 3DS stuff looks great. I can't wait for the Legend of Zelda, the new Legend of Zelda Link to the Past game that's coming out. But I think Nintendo really have some work to do to be competitive in this generation. So the industry, I think, is kind of in an interesting position. What I think, I actually think there are sort of two stories underneath the surface of E3 that you want to pay attention to. One is, what are the price of these next-gen games going to be? It seems like it's $60. Microsoft came out and said, well, all games from Microsoft Studios will preserve the $60 price point. At least I didn't see, or I didn't hear any of the publishers make any definitive statements on this. So I think you may actually have a scenario where some games are 60, some games can be higher. I think it's something that we need to pay attention to. The other element to all of this is Microsoft giving publishers the ability to block used game sales or to otherwise monetize used game sales. And I think if you followed the industry, you know that publishers for a long time have been really pissed off that you can go into a GameStop and purchase their game and they don't see a dime from that transaction. And Microsoft giving them the ability to finally profit off of that or block it completely, I actually think is pretty powerful, and I think it is going to play a role in the next generation. I think connected to that, Sony, by not doing that, and by catering to and kind of cozying up to the indie developers, is also recognized. To me, that is hedging their bets. They decided not to employ that kind of DRM strategy and not give the developers that power on the PS4, but I think the focus on indies hedges that bet. And if the publishers say, well, you know what, we invested 60, 70, 80, 100 million into this game, and we want to extract as much profit from its sales as possible, what if they go to the Xbox? Where does that leave the PlayStation 4? And I think by having a strong indie presence and letting indie publishers set prices and have sales and control the distribution is going to allow PlayStation to say, well, okay, so the big boys might be releasing an exclusive on the Xbox One, or it might be a timed exclusive, but you can always come back to this great independent game ecosystem that we have. And I think that's a real possibility. I think if there's some parity in the sales between the two systems, I think you could see publishers maybe not doing Xbox One exclusives, but definitely saying that for the first year, okay, if you want to play Call of Duty blank, or if you want to play Battlefield 7 or 8, you're going to have to do it on Xbox One for a while. And that's a dangerous position to be in. So I actually think that, and I think that's why Sony is so aggressively going after market share. The only way to prevent that is to have sales skewed so heavily in favor of the PlayStation 4 that developers can't ignore it. Now that might just be a conspiracy theory on my part, but I think it's a potential reality here. So, I would never advertise for one company or the other, but I think there's a case to be made to basically exercise your rights as a consumer, and if you value the freedom that PlayStation is offering, pick that up and contribute to an install base so that these rather limiting DRM policies don't have a bigger effect in the marketplace. Now, that having been said, I mean, I don't want to sound like a cheerleader for Sony. I think, in a sense, we're rewarding them for doing nothing. I mean, the model that they're employing is the same model that we enjoy today, and really it should be an industry standard. So, in a sense, we're going to praise them and reward them for moderating their greed, which is refreshing in today's corporate environment, but I still think it's kind of strange that, we're not praising them necessarily for an innovation, even though the system looks incredible and seems to be the hardware winner early on in the next console generation. That the most innovative thing they did was not innovate on how games are bought and sold and resold, and not innovate, quote unquote, with new DRM schemes. So it's going to be an interesting time in the industry, and I think it was a fascinating E3. I just want to end with a channel update. I've started this channel about a month ago, and I've been enjoying putting out videos on a fairly regular basis. I'm going to stop for a little while. I'm heading away, and I'll probably pick up with some video releases in mid to late July. So if you're out there and you've been watching, I do appreciate it. I know I've got a couple of subscribers, and again, I really do appreciate that. I know the channel is fairly new, and my production techniques aren't the best, but I do, if you're out there and you're watching and you're listening, I do enjoy your support, and I hope that I've been able to entertain and inform on some of these rather odd titles that I'm talking about. So thanks again, and I will see you in July.